So welcome to our February edition of our Pbis Leaders Network. Again, we will be recording for anybody who is not able to join us this morning. And this is I think our fourth in our series this year. We still have one more virtual session scheduled that will be in March. And then we have our last session actually scheduled as an in-person meeting, and it's a little bit longer. And we're going to be doing that in, I believe it's April. So we do have a few more sessions scheduled. So we hope that you can join us as we continue to meet as a network and talk about PBIS and climate and culture related things. So welcome. And as people are joining, we'll go on and continue to move along. Our PBIS Leaders Network slides are in our bit.ly, and I know Stacy has put them in the chat. So if you would like to follow along directly or you want access to the slides, they are in the chat, and you will have access to all of the links and all the information that we'll be presenting this morning. I am going to go ahead and throw it to Frank, who is going to start us with a warm-up activity. And we always start with something to kind of get our minds going as we meet. So I will throw it to Frank.
All right, good morning, everyone. We're going to start off with a little activity. Many of you have already seen Wordles or wondered what that little box grid looked like, and when your Facebook and your friends are pasting all those fun things. So we created a little Wordle in this little activity, which I will paste in the chat. And the Wordle of the day for us is going to be a word, a 5-letter word that comes out of the Culturally Responsive Guide. So if you get a chance, go ahead and try the Wordle. If you're not familiar with Wordle, if you guess the first 5-letter word, if you see a yellow, that means the letter is in the word, but not in the right place. Green means it's in the right place and in the word. And if you get all 5 letters, that means you've solved it. So if you can get a chance to go ahead and try that Wordle, and then in the chat, see how many times or how many words it takes for you to get the word correct, and post that inside the chat. Oh, sorry, try the link that I provided in the chat itself. I just gave an example in the Wordle.
I am no good at these types of activities, so I'm leaving it to you guys this morning because I am no good at it.
Remember, it's in the Culturally Responsive Guide.
Anybody have it?
I got it, but is SST allowed to play?
How many did it take you, Stacy? Oh, is that you that went, or is that me?
What'd you get? Why don't we go ahead and I don't see anything in the chat. What'd you get, Stace?
Well, Frank's hint helped. Guide
is the word. Okay.
What's nice about this one for those that are on here, thanks, Mike, for the round of applause. You can hear Mike in the background. What's nice about this one, the Wordle a day, you can create your own Wordle and different. And so if you take any kind of piece of information, you can have a little fun with your staff and use that in the future presentations.
Thanks for getting us warmed up. So guide is our word for the day, and we're going to kind of jump into what we're going to be talking about this morning. We're going to start with just a little quick overview video about student identity and voice, and then we're going to jump into the field guide, and then we're going to have our presentation from Hudson. So let's start with our video to kind of set the tone for this morning. Thanks again, Frank, for waking our minds up.
My name is DeLeon Gray. I'm an associate professor of educational psychology and equity. My research focuses on helping students, parents, teachers, and community stakeholders unpack belonging and concepts and motivation to ultimately support students' engagement and learning and productivity. Belonging has been linked to students' motivation and success in a number of ways. For one, students are more energized, they spend more time on tasks, they return to activities, and they choose to be in environments that make them feel a sense of fit. A sense of belonging at school means feeling a sense of acceptance, respect, inclusion, and support in their learning environment. There are many ways that a connection with content and academic material can make students feel at home within the classroom. It provides them with a sense of continuity. For historically marginalized students, this means a continuity with their ancestral heritage and with their community, which means that it gives more meaning and life to the activities that they do and makes them more valuable for students to engage in. Teachers can build a connection between community and content in a number of ways, one of which is bringing community members in to reinforce concepts that are covered in the classroom. Another way is to bring in information, artifacts, news, to really connect that with the learning content that's being covered in the classroom. The third way is to really allow students to imagine the ways in which the content that they're covering connects with their outside lives. We talk about cultural relevance at a very broad level, but when we break that down to bringing culture and belonging inside of a school, it means recognizing where students are. And for the students that we serve in Durham, shoes matter a lot. And so we brought those sneaker culture into a lesson on building shoes for Mars. So students got to express their creativity and ultimately design a shoe that honored their culture as we think about colonizing Mars in the future. These strategies all hinge on helping students understand that they have a place inside the classroom, they have rights, and the classroom is centered around their experience.
So we kind of wanted to set the stage there because we're going to be talking about the culturally responsive field guide, as you see on the agenda, student voice, and then we're going to have a district presentation about that. And then, of course, we always have our networking opportunities at the end. If anybody needs to has a question or wants to kind of talk to their colleagues in this work. So really thinking of today about how we're gonna build cultural relevance within the Pbis framework, as well as how do we really gauge that student voice, student connection, community connection as we're doing the work in the schools. We just wanted to remind you that at the beginning of the year, when we started our network, we did do a poll of those who were on the call and what you guys identified as places where you wanted to look are everything you see are in those green boxes. We did do a social emotional session. We did a session on the tier 2 influx. And we are this time doing the culturally responsive field guide. And there were 2 other areas, the trauma informed and then the attendance. And we're going to think about how we're going to really braid that into what we're continuing to do. But these are what the network has identified as areas that they wanted to investigate further. So today we're going to be talking about that culturally responsive field guide and student voice. So we wanted to let you know that we did use the data that we collected at the beginning, and we've been using it the entire time to plan our network meetings. So at this time, I'm going to throw it to Michelle, and Michelle's going to talk a little bit about the field guide and about what you guys can use with your Pbis practices.
Thanks, Heidi. Good morning, everyone. So the Culturally Responsive Field Guide was released just about a year ago in March of 2021. It's hard to believe that it's been a year since that was released. The purpose of the Culturally Responsive Field Guide was to give building teams, administrators, coaches, a guide for them to look at their entire school-wide Pbis framework through that culturally responsive lens. And Heidi, if you can advance to the next slide. Thank you. So you'll see on this slide, there is a direct link to pbis.org where this field guide lives. But you'll also see how it's defined. The goal of using this guide is really to make school systems more responsive to the cultures and communities that they serve. It's really recognizing where students are at, as you heard in that video earlier, And then this guide really serves to help make those connections to where your school community is at, and really think about that in the context of your PBIS framework. Next slide, Heidi. So the developers of the field guide looked at cultural responsive practices through 5 core components, and you'll see that up there on the slide. They thought of culturally responsive practices through the lens of identity, voice, supportive environments, situational appropriateness, and using data to look at how equity is represented across buildings. Next slide. Within that field guide, the 5 components are then further aligned to the 15 items within the tiered fidelity inventory. A good friend and colleague of ours, Stephanie Denham, has developed a Pbis TFI quick check, which includes the culturally responsive elaborations and self-assessment examples. You can see a visual of that on the slide. And if you click on culturally responsive elaboration and examples, that will take you directly into the guide. If you're already familiar with the TFI quick check, if your teams are using that to score the TFI, you'll see items, main ideas, and self-assessment items for the TFI. And then under that, you'll see culturally responsive elaborations, and then some examples and self-assessment items that your teams can work through. This could be used with teams that are building the framework, and it can also be used with teams to take a closer look that have been implementing some of the Tier 1 practices for a very long time. For the purpose of our time together this morning, we're going to take a deeper dive into the first and the second core component, which is identity and voice. And you'll see on the slide the items that each of those core components are aligned to. So identity is aligned to 1.7, professional development. Thanks, Heidi. And then the core component of student voice is aligned to team composition, faculty involvement, and then student, family, and community involvement. So what we're really going to be looking a little bit closer at is thinking about, do you have all voices represented on your building leadership team? Do you have an opportunity for faculty across your building to provide their voice, their ideas, their input into your framework? And then looking a little bit deeper than that, do students, families, and community members have an opportunity to provide their opinions, voice, and leadership into what's happening within your framework? Next slide. So if you haven't gotten a chance to look at the field guide, there are many, many, many great resources for your teams within the 64 pages in the field guide. I pulled out a handful within that field guide that really focus on identity and voice, and you'll see those on the slides. They are hyperlinked, so you can click on any of those 3, and it will take you to a resource to help support each of those items. The first is a really nice model out of Wisconsin's RTI framework that can take your teams through an activity to think about the will that they have to even examine these practices. The fill looks at how they're going to gain knowledge about the families and the experiences within the building. And then the skill is the action plan that they're going to put in place to accomplish this across their framework within the building. The second is a direct link to the SAS, which many of you are familiar with, as well as an activity in Appendix D of the field guide that gives staff a way to look across your PBIS systems and consider the culturally responsive voice across each of those components. And then the last, I wish my teacher knew, is a really unique way for buildings to gather student voice prior to the start of the year and then make connections to the framework to see if they've considered the cultural background and experiences of all kids that are entering into your building. The last resource on this slide is a culturally responsive field guide specific to early childhood. So if you're supporting classrooms within your building, preschool through grade 3, the equity coaching guide on this slide provides 18 culturally responsive questions specific to early childhood. And just like the culturally responsive field guide, there are then a number of resources built into the guide to support dual language learners, how experiences of those learners impact classroom behavior specifically. There's also resources on providing positive descriptive feedback and how cultures and experiences can impact how that's received. And then there's some great conversation starters when thinking about teaming with families and positive behavior practices. So that's just a snapshot, as I said, of some of the resources that could help support your teams in this conversation. There is a live link at the top under resources of the slide. If you click on that, it'll take you into our Pbis warehouse. And you'll find all 3 of these tools within that warehouse. So you'll find the TFI Quick Check with the culturally responsive elaborations, you'll find the field guide, and you'll find the equity coaching guide, all within our warehouse. All right. So I'm going to turn things over to Mike, who's going to take us into a little bit of a deeper dive into his experience with student voice within his building. So I'm going to turn things over to Mike.
Thank you, Michelle. Good morning,
Sure.
everybody. It's nice to see everybody virtually. Today, I'm going to share with you some information and some ideas as to why teachers should incorporate student voice in the creation of expectations, procedures, and routines, and then how you can start to build the capacity for teachers and students in making student voice a common practice in the classroom. First, the why. Many students, they have the experience of being told, here are the expectations, and essentially we're telling you how to think and how to behave. But incorporating student voice in the process gives students a say and makes them feel valued, which is all complementary to the Pbis framework. So classroom expectations, routines, and procedures in which students are involved in creating and contributing in the development of, I don't know if that's proper English or not, or more likely to be followed. They have more skin in the game. Students, when they actively participate in the process, they're not just receiving the information, they're actually being part of it. And I believe that we have to build the capacity for students to feel comfortable using their voice in the classroom. I often found when I was teaching, even when I was working with students as an administrator, students were very hesitant to express their voice. And the best way to learn how to use your voice is to practice using your voice, and teachers have an awesome opportunity to do so. Another bonus about using voice in creating policies and procedures is that students will start to think more critically, that higher level of thinking, as they develop ideas to share with the class. And for adults, leading the classroom and in the building in general, it sends the message to students that you value students working together and that you model that and you foster that. So I'd like to share a quick video of how a school uses student voice in their daily building-wide operations. Hit it, Heidi.
My name is Yasmin.
My name is Ruben.
My name is Becca.
My name is Chautauqua.
My name is Kaylee.
My name is Stephanie.
My name is Bela.
I'm Ethan.
My name is Candace.
What student voice means to me is being able to be heard by other students, by faculty members, and by your parents.
If you're able to have your voice heard, the ideas will formulate to come together to create a community that everyone's happy in and everyone feels comfortable in.
To make an impact on the school, and to be listened to and to be heard.
These voices of the students translate into actions, because I feel like that's the best way to measure this.
For a student to voice a problem that they think or something that they could change within the school and to get a response quickly and to see results makes them feel more part of the school community, and it makes them feel respected.
At the school, we have a school council, and it's made up of teachers, parents, and students, and the principal. So basically, we talk about different ways to make the school better. We also talked about academic integrity.
I think the Academic Integrity Project was received very differently because students were leading it as opposed to the administration, just because receiving it from a peer made it seem like we were kind of trying to make the school better as a whole, as opposed to kind of punishing people for what they've done in the past.
I'm Brian. I'm the principal of Natick High School in Natick, Massachusetts. Student voice matters because you end up with a better outcome. I need to turn to the students to say, this is just as much your school as it is your teacher's school or your principal's school. In fact, it's more their school than ours.
I also think that teachers have the ability to make personal connections with students, and when they do that, it creates an environment of caring for each other, and students are more willing and wanting to learn in an environment where the teacher cares about them and makes those personal connections.
Yeah, my favorite part of class is like in the very beginning of the year when we do like our class norms. So that like the teachers are giving what they expect and the students are giving what they expect, so that the rest of the year can go by smoothly and we can all respect each other and just have the normalities of the class that we will go through every day.
And I really think that's important because that allows us to kind of act as a whole community as opposed to separate teachers and students and administration. We're all kind of one big community.
Thanks, Heidi. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. I'm a big video fan. And, while watching that, a standout for me, there were lots of things stood out, but two things stood out for me. One was the one student that was explaining how the best way to measure if student voice is being heard is to see how student voice leads to actions by the adults and the stakeholders involved in governing the school. And another standout was the student who expressed that her favorite thing to do is at the beginning of the school year when the class discusses and determines their norms at the beginning of the year. I wanted to share that video because it shows the power and benefit of including student voice and how it can affect and impact positively school climate. So with this, I wanted to share with you some ideas about how to build capacity for both students and teachers, strengthening that student voice muscle, if you will. Like I said earlier, I often encountered students that just were so hesitant to say anything. So we're trying to build that capacity. I like to use the word muscle. Students spend the majority of their school day in classrooms with teachers. So it makes sense to begin with the classroom, the grassroots movement, if you will. So here are just a few practices to flex that student voice muscle and build some capacity. Heidi, next slide. I'm sure we all have used the class opening as part of our instructional canon. Like today, we had a moment where we started it kind of, Heidi even said, we cleared our brains to, get the party started, if you will. And we have used those things in our canon of teaching in our careers, but the point is to enrich that opening piece so it has meaning with an emphasis on student engagement rather than just passive compliance. Take out your books, take out your Chromebook. The bell activity is, ready to go. The overarching goal is to prioritize student voice on a daily basis and place students at the center of the learning experience. So when students arrive to class, they have a lot on their mind. It could be, something like from the Brady Bunch, like, oh, I have 2 dates on the same night and I have to cancel one. Or it could be serious stuff. I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to get home today or what am I expecting. We want to calibrate students. And I always say to folks, you want your school or your classroom, every piece to be a place where students know what to expect. And they should expect things like kindness, respect, peace, understanding expectations, knowing routines. So when students arrive to class, they have all kinds of things going around in their mind, especially the high school group. And there's that phrase, leave your baggage at the door and we'll get things started. Well, we all know that that's easier said than done. So a way to clear minds, student minds, and even adult learners' minds is giving them an opportunity to get accustomed to sharing their voice and create a predictable routine at the start of each class or day. So we've all taught, we all have used an opening at some point when we're doing our instruction, but an SEL practice, it's a signature SEL practice, is welcoming rituals. And it supports the contribution by all voices. It sets norms for respectful listening. It allows students to connect with one another and creates a sense of belonging. So for these rituals to be successful, and like I said, we all have our welcoming pieces that we do when we start a lesson, but they have to be carefully chosen and connect to the learning of the day. And students will see the benefit of that when they get a chance to engage in that. Next slide, Heidi. Another thing to do that teachers can do to build that muscle is prioritize student voice when creating lessons. When students know we value what they have to say, they're more likely to share their thoughts and insights. It may seem like we don't have time to engage with every single student in the class, but we can take deliberate action to do so. And if you think about some of your experiences with your Pbis training and implementation, you know the value of that contingent and non-contingent communication. You could start a lesson by asking a question or creating your lessons. You can start by asking things like, when will students collaborate to problem solve? Or do I ask the students to create the questions that will show me that they're learning? Do I ask them to contribute to creating a product? Other things that teachers can ask themselves. How often do I give students the opportunity to speak out in front of the class? Maybe write on the board, conduct a demonstration, maybe show the class how they go about doing something. Once again, building that capacity or getting rid of that hesitation where students are afraid to engage and allowing them to be part of the process. And also one thing too, I had taught some journalism classes in yearbook, and I also did the theater. There were all kinds of opportunities for students to be seen outside of the classroom. But sometimes, you have some students that aren't so extroverted and want to do those activities. But think about, when are products, when do students do things, and when is their work published? Are they writing for people outside of the classroom, or will other people see the work that they're doing, giving them an opportunity to strut their stuff and have their voice heard? Also, do students have choice in the classroom? Once again, that fortifies the whole concept that students have an opportunity to have a say in what they're doing in the classroom. Next slide. Ask students about their lives beyond the classroom. John Hattie's work endorses that a positive, caring, and respectful climate in the classroom is a prior condition to learning, and that strong teacher-student relationship increases student confidence to share their voices. And yeah, I did read that. I didn't have that memorized, but that's an important piece to show that our students, that we value them, and that we understand that their lives beyond what we can see on the surface in the classroom are just important. Some students will clearly make themselves known. I'm sure all of you just think about that for a second. You could think in your career, or even someone in your life right now, yes, I know exactly who you're talking about. I know a lot about that student because that person or that student's ready to just give it up. But we also have to think about the kids and the students that take the back seat and may not be so forthcoming. So we need to intentionally interact. And once again, going back to that non-contingent communication, when students are entering the classroom, saying, hey, how are you doing? Or finding things out about them. Oh, how did that game go last night? Or, oh, I really like what you have on today. And that opens up the conversation. So there's that non-contingent communication. Also, when students are working in small groups, or if they're conferring, walking around the group, being part of that active supervision, which is Pbis framework, to listen to them, understand what's going on in their lives beyond just the surface. Also displaying work, like I had said earlier, but it also could play into, when you're planning or when you're looking at, their lives outside, you may have them contribute to a display in the classroom or a showcase. That type of could be part of the acknowledging system for positive behavior. And finally, next slide. Ask students for feedback and use it. I've seen quite a few things. I saw one YouTube video in particular, because like I said, I'm a big YouTube person, where a teacher incorporated the practice of taking survey data from every unit, every lesson, and getting feedback from students and finding out what worked and didn't work. And then also using that information to then design and maybe alter how he would approach his next lesson. So, ask for that feedback when you're working with students. Once again, that builds their capacity so they feel comfortable using their voice in class. Whenever feasible, ask for feedback and implement their suggestions. And it not only informs, how we could do things differently instruction-wise, it conveys to students that we value their insight and that their voices are important. So I think this would be a good way to segue, because we're talking about collecting student information, their opinions, their data. I have a couple resources here for you. I think it's a good way to segue into looking at one of our schools in the region who use student voice as a way to go further, and will share with us how they capture student voice. So Kelly, that's your introduction. Take it away.
Thanks, Mike. I'm Kelly Kemp. I'm the Director of Pupil Services for Hudson City Schools. And I was going to share a little bit of two examples specifically of ways that we captured student voice. I'm going to share my screen with you. Oops, didn't want that one, sorry. Actually, I can do this and just close it. Okay, so I wanted to start by sharing the two examples I'm going to share are basically a result of what started as information that we received from students regarding our Panorama data. So for those who are not familiar, we have been using Panorama Surveys for the last several years to try to gather student voice, and also to better understand, do our students have the social emotional competencies that we hope they do? And it is something that we're being given to students twice a year now, usually early in the school year, and then kind of later in the spring. And then we can see if there's any growth, and we're using that information then to drive initiatives and make decisions within the district. So we started in the spring of 19, and other than the spring of 2020, we have given it, as I said, twice a year. We give it to students in grades 3 through 12. And we've actually used it for students, teachers, other staff. There are several opportunities for community and parent surveys as well. So you can develop whatever surveys you want. We had a group of stakeholders within the district to help determine what topics we wanted. So as a district, at the time, I think there's even more now, but at the time there were 22 topics to select from. And you can see here where what we have selected for our students. We originally selected 6, the top 3 on the left and the top 3 on the right. So we were looking at students' skills and competencies, and then we were looking at student supports and environment. And then after COVID, we added supportive relationships, positive feelings, and challenging feelings, just to kind of gauge on how our students were doing as a result of, pretty much all the trauma that the world was experiencing. And then certainly them as students, especially being out of school. And then the 3 that are in green, we added, I believe 2 years ago. They were part of a series of questions related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm just going to focus on sense of belonging in particular. So if you look here at our sense of belonging data for the last several years, you can see, it's slightly increased, but certainly not where we would like it to be. So overall, our students are telling us that's how they're feeling. And this is based on students in grades 6 through 12. So this is not the younger grades, this is the older grades. that I've specifically pointed out here, because I'm going to show you an example from the middle school and an example from the high school of trying to hear from students. And if you look here, you can see the breakdown of the questions. Oh, excuse me. You can see the breakdown of the questions and what, where there might be some areas of concern or areas that we could grow in, or areas that we did better in. And if you look to the far right, the arrow up or arrow down will show growth since the last time we gave it. So that's what that means. But these are the types of questions, topics that students were answering when they were looking at sense of belonging. And what really was telling is we started to then look at our data by different subgroups. So you can see across the top the different areas, but in the red, I tried to mark off the sense of belonging column. And when you look at EL students or students with disabilities, or even male and female, it tells us a little bit of information, but when you dig a little deeper, this now tells us by grade. So overall, you can see as the students get older, their sense of belonging wanes a little for various reasons, I'm sure. But then we really look then at the information based on student race, and that was really telling. So if you look, other than white students, that's pretty neutral. They're feeling pretty good about their sense of belonging, or at least neutral overall. You can see that our other students of color definitely are not feeling like they belong. And so that was pretty telling to us, and we wanted to try to do something about it. But interestingly, the one example that I'm going to start with, we have, let me share this first. We had, these are just some ways that we were trying to capture student voice across the district. Again, I mentioned Panorama, a principal advisory committee. There's a leadership conference where 100 or so students at the high school will go to a leadership conference, and they get a lot of FaceTime with the administration to give feedback, or club leaders or student government. But if you consider all of those different groups, those are a lot of really high performing students who are overachieving and things like that. So it's not that we're not hearing student voice, but we may not be hearing everyone's student voice. And we weren't positive that all students were represented in those groups. So it was, again, trying to figure out ways to hear from everyone, and not just a large majority of students, or again, students who might already be feeling like they have a good sense of belonging because they're in a lot of these clubs anyway. So as I mentioned, we were looking at our Panorama results, and we have something called a Cultural Proficiency Advisory Committee. It is made up of staff, parents, administrators, and students, and it's been meeting for, I think we're going on 2 years now. And every twice a year when we do Panorama, we share those Panorama results with this group. And most recently in the fall, when our fall data was shared, our students who are part of this committee also saw the results and saw the breakdown of the results by race, and felt like that's not okay. We really need to do something about it. So it was we have a group called Dear Asian Youth, and they decided that they wanted to create this event for students to be heard and to share their voice. So it was completely student driven, which was incredible actually. And they created what they called a You Belong forum, and they advertised it, and they did announcements. And then they specifically reached out to several groups that they felt were underrepresented or could be underrepresented. So they reached out to all the members of the African American Awareness Club at the high school, the GSA Club, ROX, which is Ruling Our Experiences. It's basically a group for young women and like empowering young women to make good choices. So they felt like, even if you looked at the data, I don't know if you caught that, but our female versus male sense of belonging, there was a difference. So they reached out to those clubs specifically and invited them, and then certainly put it on the announcement and had some other posters and things hung. And they ended up with 40 students that came to this You Belong forum after school. Prior to the forum, they did reach out to our DEI coordinator and just ask for some guidance to like help to like plan it, but she said it was really facilitated and they were giving the input. She was just giving some guidance. And I wanted to share a little bit about what that day looked like, or what that after school event looked like. So they took all the students who attended and they divided it up into, they created 4 groups and the students rotated through every group. And each group had a leader with some questions to kind of get some group discussion going with the students. And you can see the 4 areas of topics that they were looking at: racial identity, gender identity, sense of belonging, and then stereotypes. And then they rotated 15 minutes into each of those groups. And they had community agreements that they went over with all the participants, so all the students there, which was excellent, to try to just have it go well and have it be fair and representative of everyone's voices and respectful process. So they shared their community agreements with everyone. They broke everyone up into these groups of 4. And then they had leaders who were leading the discussion. And then each group had these conversation starters in case students, were quieter or didn't want to participate. And so I just wanted you to get a sense. I'm not going to read all those, but just to get a sense of some of the questions. And these were some of the questions they asked in the group about racial identity. And then here are some of the questions for gender identity. And then some conversation starters on stereotypes, how kids felt about that. And then finally, some sense of belonging ones. And as a result of the You Belong forum, they said kids were really felt heard, really were able to share, felt like it was a positive experience, and then now want to take that information to the administration. There were advisors there, club advisors and some counselors that came, but they really let the students, they didn't want to make it their event. They really wanted to honor that the kids wanted it to be their event and they're talking about it. So they didn't interrupt or try to redirect the conversations or try to drive what the kids were talking about, other than, again, these conversation starters. So the kids really felt like they were heard and that it was a good forum. And then another example that I wanted to quickly share was we had our, again, the same Panorama data from the fall. We did not do a great job when we first started collecting this data of sharing it back with the students. We did a great job, we thought, as a district, looking at the data and then making decisions about what we might want to do to address it. But we never really told the students, oh, we actually heard you and this is what you said. And so what you come to realize is if you don't do that, then students start to be like, especially if they're taking the same survey twice a year, they start to be like, why am I doing this? Who even cares? You're not even listening. And then, you wonder, do we even get good information from students? So we were like, we got to do a way better job of telling the students we heard them and these were the results. So that has been a focus really for the last year, trying to make sure that we tell students or highlight for students certain things about it. At the middle school, our principal, Dr. Kemp, decided I want designated time for all students to be able to hear some of the results and then talk about it. So there is an advisory period that is built into the schedule. I believe it's every 2 weeks, where everybody is in a small advisory group. So on February 28th, this is what the advisory groups at the middle school at the same time are going to be looking at. And she did a video and then a voiceover. I'm just going to show you the notes. I'm not even going to show you what the specifics, but just so you can see, she did a voiceover that all kids will watch at the same time. And then the advisor during advisee is going to kind of lead the students in this discussion. But basically what she's trying to tell the students is, why Panorama is important, why we want to hear from them, and how they want their experience at the Hudson Middle School to be better. And so she kind of goes through and she explains to them, first and foremost, we're here for you and we want to make your experience better and we care about you. And then she kind of goes through and explains to them a little bit about so this is some of the results we got, and this is how we look at it, and this is what it means to us. And she does it very quickly. This whole video is like 20 20 some minutes, so it's not that long. But she tries to explain like the changes that they see and everything. And she first talks about student relationships, and then I'm going to go down to sense of belonging real quick and just tell you how they ended that. She has a little time for partner talk. And then she says, you know, how much sense of belonging means to them, and they really want all kids to feel like they belong and matter, and that they want to hear from students. So she starts there, and then she gives the results and shows, now these are just the middle school results, so a little better than 6 through 12 overall. And then she says, she picks out some things that, you know, we're grateful for this, but we know we have room to grow and we want to do better. And she tells them how we look at the data and get that information and extract the information we want. And then shares how students overall answered all these questions. And then she ends it with, I'll get down to the bottom. Oh, here she highlights for students, the way Panorama works is it's kind of like on a Likert scale. And if you pick the top 2 answers, like those are most favorable. And then there's kind of a neutral response. And then there are ones that are more on the, I'm going to say negative side, or when students feel like they don't belong. So you can see here, and she says, we have about 100 students that either say they belong a little bit or they don't belong at all. And even though it's just 100 out of our 900 students, we don't want to have any students feel that way. And so we want to make sure we're hearing from everyone. And so she highlights that for students. And then she, at the end, reminds them again that their voices matter. And then the rest of the class is spent talking to students about what we can do differently. So some celebrations from the school, and then also if she wants to make sure that students have a specific staff member that they connect to. So it's a way of kind of make sure everyone feels like they have a trusted adult by asking them, to think about if there's somebody that they can connect to. And then what can we do in the classroom or in the school overall, and allow the students a good period of time to really give specific examples to improve their experience at Hudson Middle School. So I thought that was a good example to, again, highlight. And those are the 2 that I want to share. I feel like it was we're trying to figure out how we can help students feel like they belong here, especially our students who feel underrepresented. And then I love the comment in the video about, really, it's really those next steps if it leads to action. So student voice, the meaningful part is if it leads to action. So, we want to make sure that we not only give them time to be heard, but then also, follow up with what they are sharing with us. I feel like oftentimes when we get to the results, we dive in and start to try to figure out why students said a certain thing, or we try to come up with really great things that might improve their sense of belonging, and think, how do we even know? I mean, it's so much better to hear from the students what would improve their sense of belonging, instead of us saying, maybe if we did this one thing here or this one initiative, that would help. But really trying to not have the adults take over that conversation and immediately try to make those decisions, but instead hear from the students and then try to take action on their behalf. So.
And Kelly, I love the example that you gave at the end of that class, where they identify as they're a trusted adult that they can have some kind of a relationship or connection with. A lot of times we talk about schools that are trying to make that connectedness, where they just list the kids and have the adults say, I have a connection with this kid, or I have a connection with this kid, and really map it out to see which kids don't have any connections at all. So I love the fact that that's part of the actions that you guys are taking to make sure that that connectedness or that sense of belonging is really established, which I think is really great. Thank you so much. I think the information you presented is really great. So I would like to open it up. If anybody does have questions regarding anything that Kelly presented, you could either pop it in the chat or unmute and ask if there's anything or comments or questions or anything about anything that Kelly presented. So I'll give it a minute if anybody has a question. Mike says, thank you. I thought, yeah, it was really, really good information. Thoughts or questions for Kelly? Yeah, and Megan popped in the chat box to share the why. I think we always talk about how important it is that, nobody likes anything done to them, but when we kind of explain why, the adults as well, not just kids, but I think if we share the why with them, it makes a lot more sense. And I love, Kelly, the fact that you said, I think a lot of the adults always we want to rush to let's fix it or let's figure out why. I love that you said toward the end there that you just kind of shared the data with the kids and kind of let that kind of take an organic, route, because I think sometimes, as adults, we want to fix it or we want to address it. And sometimes that's not going to get us where we need to go. So just putting it out there to have kids react to what they've done. It's always really important to, share that data once you've collected it. I think it's true with adults too, because if they don't feel like they've taken their time to answer those questions and to take those surveys and do all that, but if they never feel like we use it or we feed it back to them, people don't want to do it anymore. Or kids don't want to do it. So I think that's really, really also an important thing to do.
And
Is if we're collecting it, we need to share it back with them.
And as I said, we weren't always we were so oh, we got this data. Now what are we going to do with it? And we were focused on it at the beginning when we started using Panorama and then we started to realize this is going to be so meaningless to students. And we had a few students tell us, why were we even doing this? And then we were like, gosh, we have to do better. So again, just trying to constantly reflect and say, and as adults, we'd get everyone in the room and everyone would problem solve. And then we had to be like, no, let's hold off and see if we can share with students and then get them to give us the feedback that we're looking for.
Absolutely. So I'll give the opportunity. Any last questions or thoughts for Kelly?
Kelly, do you know the Panorama, you said you use it for grades 6 through 12, right?
Well, we use it for grades 3 through 12. I was just
3
showing
through 12.
6 through
Okay.
12 results.
I was wondering what the stretch was. So is 3 the youngest age you can use it with?
That's what it's really earmarked for. It's not that they don't have anything for the younger grades, but you're really not necessarily getting the right student responses younger than that. And actually the 3 to 5 questions are worded slightly differently than the 6-12, even on the same topics, just for, so they can understand it. But yeah, they don't recommend that you go younger than 3rd grade. So we have actually created some surveys or questions for our kindergarten and 1st and 2nd graders. Our counselors have worked on that to try to get either parent or student direct feedback, again, on a smaller sample of questions that we created just to, so we can at least hear from them, but we're not using Panorama with them.
Okay, thank you.
And that's a good point, Stacey. And for those of you that are using Pbis apps for surveys, there are some climate surveys on there that are directed to staff, community, and students. And I think the youngest that the climate surveys go, actually, I think they start at 3rd grade. I don't think they have anything lower than that, probably for the same reason that Kelly said. But we do work with some buildings that will construct their own surveys that are more developmentally appropriate, I guess I would say, for the younger students. But the Pbis app surveys do get at some of this climate culture belonging type of thing, and those do start at 3 and above, 3rd grade and above, I believe. So thank you again to Kelly for presenting. We really wanted to throw it out there as far as we talk a lot about doing the framework, but if student voice, community voice, family voice is not captured, it's not really going to benefit your communities that you serve and the people that you serve. So it's really, really important to make sure you gauge that. And it sounds like Hudson is doing a lot of great things where they're actually taking the data, using the data, and sharing it back with students. Again, they don't want to be filling out those surveys unless they know that data is being used. So I want to thank Kelly again for taking her time this morning to share with us. So
and I would like to thank our students, because they are the ones who really drove all the whole thing at the high school. And I thought, how great is that? We could have created something and it probably would have been far less meaningful. So I was grateful that that the staff up there was willing to be like, let's let them take over. So that was good.
And that's a little scary sometimes. I think sometimes the adults are a little scared to do that, Yeah, and it's good that they had the vulnerability to be able to, and having being a little bit vulnerable sometimes is scary. It's scary. Michelle did go ahead and pop in some that climate survey. If you guys are interested in that, that is in the chat, and that is a free survey that you can use through PBIS apps. You just have to have a PBIS coordinator set it up for you. If you don't know who that person is, you can reach out to us and we can let you know who those folks are. I think most on the call this morning, you have somebody internally that can actually generate those surveys for you. So, but if you're not sure, you can contact us. So we want to, again, we're keeping this slide in our slides because we want to remind you that all of the things that we've talked about this morning are connected. We specifically talk about PBIS, but it's related to your social emotional learning, as Kelly and Mike shared this morning, your mental health efforts, and anything that you're doing restorative. See you later. Anything else you're doing restorative practices, it's all related, and we're really looking at these tiered levels of support. So we'd like to keep that in there for you. We want to remind you that we do still have our resources for you, our virtual classroom, our leadership meeting recordings, which we will send out today after our meeting, our recording of the meeting. We have new resources in there to support TFI that Michelle shared this morning, and some other things specifically to the tier. So that is there for you. And we'd also, again, like to remind you that we do have one more in-network, well, I should say virtual meeting that will be coming up in March. And then we do have our last meeting in person, and that is going to be in April. And you can register for next month's meeting via these slides.